Happy New Year. I hope that the year has started well for you, 5 days old though it is. Now we're looking this morning at Luke chapter 2, verses 41 to 52, and I want to acknowledge that many of the ideas from this sermon have come from a brilliant sermon I heard from one of my favourite preachers, Alistair Begg. In fact, I'm looking forward to hearing him speak just this week at the CMS Summer School at Katoomba. Now, my first point today really serves as the introduction to the sermon. So I'm going to hop right in and give you the outline. Here's where we're heading. The story, the sandwich, and the significance. I hope that has you perhaps a little bit intrigued as to where we're going. Now, the story, of course, we know well of Jesus as a young boy in the temple. And it's the only recorded material we have of Jesus as a young man growing up. Now, Jesus was growing up in a despised, half-heathen place called Galilee, and in an obscure little town in Galilee called Nazareth. It was the last place that anyone would have looked for a king or a Messiah. But from there, his parents took him up to Jerusalem for the Passover. We don't know whether this is the first time that he'd gone up to Jerusalem for the Passover, but we certainly know that he did at age 12. And in the course of the event, he's misplaced in the huge crowds. What would have happened is that women and children would have travelled ahead, dads and young men behind, and Jesus would have fit into either category. And perhaps towards the end of the day, Mary notices Jesus is not there. She thinks perhaps he's with Joseph and the older boys behind, and Joseph is probably thinking, I'm sure he's with his mother. And they look at each other when they stop for the night. I thought he was with you. No, I thought he was with you. Neither of them had him, and neither of them knew where he was. And you can imagine that for any parent, that would have been a frightening scenario. Now, they were about a day's journey out from Jerusalem, so it was a day's journey back. No doubt they decided to sleep and then decided, well, we'll see if we can find him in the morning. Hence, we read in verse 46, after 3 days, they found him in the temple. Now, what happens when we've found our children after they've been missing? We'll say to them, what were you doing? What were you thinking? And we all expect the standard replies, perhaps some creative responses. And then we say, why have you treated us like this? We've been worried sick. And yet Jesus answers, verse 49, why were you looking for me? Did you not know I must be in my Father's house? Now, there's a little letter next to the word house, and in the NIV, a footnote at the bottom of the page, which suggests an alternate translation, which reads, not my Father's house, but my Father's business. Don't you know that I need to be about my Father's business? It's probably a more accurate translation, because the word for house or temple is not actually used in the Greek. So a literal reading is, it is necessary that I be about my Father's things. In other words, don't you realize that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing? It's a staggering thing. And this is all unfolding in the context of a question and answer session involving Jesus and the leaders in the temple courts, the teachers in the temple courts. So the methodology of instruction at the time was that the pupil would ask questions, the teacher would give answers, and then the teacher would, as it were, interrogate the student to see if they had properly understood what is being said. Hence, in verse 47, everyone who heard him was amazed at his answers. He was obviously able accurately to report back to the teacher what he had been learning. And the teachers were marvelling that a young boy had been able to pick up things so quickly. But in the middle of this, Mum and Dad turn up. And Jesus said that he had to be about his Father's things, and Luke says they didn't understand what he was saying to them, verse 50. And in verse 51, Mary added this to her treasure chest of all the things, all the many things that she had been pondering. So now what? Where do we go with this? What are we meant to be learning here? I'm sure it's not a lesson, as actually some have said, that over the years, it's important that children go to Sunday school. Friends, that's not the lesson. Or some have argued that this is about being careful about not to lose your kid in a crowd. Friends, that's not why this is in the Bible. Nor am I convinced, as some have said, that it's about the godness or the deity of Jesus, as if to say, look how clever he is, he must be God. I don't think that's the lesson. So why is this here? Well, let me take you to my very strange second point and see if it helps. The sandwich. I want you to notice that this incident of Jesus as a boy in the temple is sandwiched between two summary statements about Jesus growing up. Have a look with me at verse 40. I'll put it on the screen. It comes just after Simeon's song, which we looked at last week. We read, "And the child grew and became strong. He was filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was on him." Now look at verse 52 at the end of today's passage. "And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favour with God and man." Now, I've put these two on the screen so you can see them together. He's 8 days old at the point of the first description and 12 years old, I beg your pardon, at the time of the second. Why is there such a similar phrase used twice with the temple sandwiched in between? Well, here's one possibility. That the emphasis here is not on the godness, the deity of Jesus, but on the humanity of Jesus. The little boy grew. He became strong, just like all little boys, all being well, do. And as he grew in size and in stature and in strength, so he grew in wisdom. Now, of course, it's true that he was God in the manger, age 0, and he was God in the temple, age 12. He had been God from eternity with the Father. But he was human. He was man. Let's be clear, Jesus was a real baby and a real 12-year-old and a real teenager. And his body had the same biological composition as you and me, and the same anatomy as any male, the same central nervous system, the same sensitivity to pain as any human. God became man and was like any other child. He wasn't half man and half God. He was all God and all man. And he was a very typical first century Jewish kid. Yeah, he would go out the back with his mates and they'd say, let's stand back to back and see who's the tallest, or let's go and kick a ball around. Don't think for a moment that he was a sort of a Superman able to leap tall buildings at a single bound. We can often imagine a sort of a comic strip Christ who did magic tricks for his mates. Don't imagine him being able to shoot every basket and make every putt and win every race and solve every problem. That is a phantom Christ. It's not the one described here. And just as he had a real human body, so he had a real human mind. You don't think Jesus emerged from the womb able to say his alphabet, do you? You don't think he knew his colours because he was God? No. Mary sat with him and taught him his colours, just as you did with yours or your children or will. The grass, Jesus, that's green. And the sky, what colour's that? Blue. Good boy, Jesus. And he would go out and play, and his parents would answer his questions, and over time he became better informed. He observed life. He observed people. Remember later he would say, consider the lilies of the field. How did he know that? Well, he'd been out and about in the field, observing how lilies grow. Or he would come to say, 2 men went up to the temple to pray, because he'd seen them. He'd observed people. He grew in wisdom and stature. Or some tenants of the vineyard ripped off their owner. He'd seen such things. Or some guy wanted his inheritance before his dad died. He probably knew a bloke like that. He was a normal young man. His dad taught him how to hold a hammer and saw a piece of wood. He had a normal development as a human, and he grew in wisdom and stature. Well, you might be asking, well, Mark, where are you going with this? Does this matter? Why are we making such a big deal of this? So third, let's look at the significance. It matters incredibly. Without a human Christ, there is no atonement for sin. And without a divine Christ, there is no atonement for sin. The Jesus who now lives to intercede for us is the Jesus who, as a 12-year-old boy in the temple, is was saying, don't you understand that I need to be about my Father's things? And therefore, we do not have in Jesus someone who is removed and distant from our own human experience. We have someone who understands human weaknesses and infirmities. We have someone, as we read in Hebrews, who was tempted in all points and yet was without sin. So this morning when we came to church and we thought, oh, look, I don't even know if anyone knows me here. I don't think anyone knows the longings of my heart, the hurts, the aches, the anxieties that I know. I don't know if there's anybody I can go to. I want to tell you that there is someone to whom you can go. And I want to point him out to you. He's your only Saviour and friend. And he's very real. And he totally gets you. He was a full-on human being. Not God in some sort of remote, removed, distant, impersonal way. But a human who knows us, who walked this planet, who knows our experiences, who feels everything we feel, who knows the full range of emotions that we know, joy and grief and loss and anxiety and excitement and uncertainty and anticipation and having nowhere to lay his head. We have in Jesus a God who grieves with us and walks with us and strengthens us and who knows us and knows life. And you can run to him today and you can share everything with him and find grace to help you in your time of need. Well, that's the first way it matters, but there is a second way that is also significant, and it has to do with this phrase, the Father's business, that it was necessary for him to be about. What was that business? Well, we could gather a few verses, couldn't we? Like John 1:18. The one and only Son, who is himself God and is in closest relationship with the Father, has made him known. Yes, he came to reveal God to us. That was his Father's business. Or John the Baptist, when he first saw Jesus, called out, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." Yes, that was the Father's business, to take away sin. Or he came to be the resurrection and the life, so that whoever believes in me, he said, will live even though they die. That was the Father's business. Or 1 John 4, he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for sin. That was his Father's business. He had to be about his Father's business, making the Father known, living a perfect life, keeping the law for us, taking away the sin of the world, pouring out his blood for our forgiveness, dying that we might live, and rising to new life that we might share it. And that is why he cried out on the cross, "It is finished." The work that he'd set out to do, his Father's business, had been done. Jesus fulfilled the Father's work. He did it. He did it perfectly, and he did it wonderfully, and he did it sacrificially, and he did it in love for you. If you're a believer here today, you're his, now and forever. And you can be certain and assured and confident and grateful and thankful. I hope you are. But if you're here with us today and not yet a believer, here's an invitation to all who are weary and heavy laden to come be forgiven. It's the best news that we have for people of the Central West of New South Wales. The best news they will ever hear, the best invitation. You can do that right now, if you've never done this before, by honestly saying sorry and humbly surrendering your life to be lived for Jesus, so that you too can leave here forgiven, assured, and confident of where you stand. Well, let's sum up. We've looked at the story, the sandwich, and the significance. A normal young boy grew up, as all young boys do, and grew in wisdom and stature. And the grace of God was upon him, and he grew in favour with God and man. And he began to be about his Father's business, which was to reveal the Father, to live a perfect life and die that we might live, and rise that we might enter into eternity with him. And he did this perfectly until he cried out on the cross, "It is finished." And he knows you, and he loves you, and he lived for you, and died for you, and then rose for you, and by his Spirit dwells in your heart, that he might be in the closest proximity to you that you could ever imagine. And he will reside there until he comes for you or comes again to take you to be with him for all eternity. Do you love him?